All right, guys, this week we're talking about isometric contractions and corresponding adaptations. This is part 3 in a series on muscular contractions and their specific adaptations. So remember, each contraction comes with its own adaptation. Points to be covered this week: we're going to describe isometric contractions. We're going to talk about the adaptations isometric contractions might yield, the specificities required of isometric contractions to yield specific adaptations, examples of isometric only or isometric focused exercises, and specific athletic traits that might improve from a focus on isometric contractions. We've already gone over in the past episodes concentric contraction, which is when a muscle shortens. Think of bicep curl when you're curling the arm up, your hand up towards the shoulder. Eccentric contraction is the lengthening. This week, isometric contractions, the length of a muscle does not change. So, example, spinal extensors, they keep you upright all day long, and there's not a whole lot of change in their size or in their length. Some adaptations that come from isometric contractions: muscles, tendons, and collagen connective tissue from resisting stretch. You see my man Jake Tura, he's been on my podcast before, but he's doing a lot of crazy things with vertical leap by simply a focus on the tendon itself, which we'll talk a little bit about today. The adaptations from isometric contractions will be specific to the angle of the joint of which that contraction is taking place. Maximal, what you're going to get is maximal motor unit recruitment, because there's an abundance of time for the cross bridges from the myelin and actin to take place. So, and then, you have all the time in the world to produce maximal amounts of force if that's what you're doing. Because an isometric contraction, if you're just pausing a weight, you're not necessarily producing a maximum force. You're producing the amount of force it takes to pause. So it just depends on how you're doing your isometric contraction. A beautiful thing about isometrics is it's only about 6 hours of recovery time that needs to be allotted. So you can, if you have some knee issues that are bothering you, you can use isometric contractions to strengthen the knee. And then you can do it almost every single day, because as long as you give yourself 6 hours prior to when you're going to be training again. So it's a great way to really strengthen joints at specific angles and all the properties of that joint. So great for recovery and increases in elasticity. Responsible for recent increases in vertical leap and decreases in sprint times if you add isometrics with bounding. Isometrics are going to cause a thickness of the tendon, but then you need the bounding or explosive type movements to create more of a matrix, which is that's what makes it really tight. So Dr. Keith Barr is the go-to when it comes to tendons. So I recommend you guys all Google Keith Barr, and there's a million articles and podcasts and research pieces of research where he's led it, and a lot of research being compiled by him to show the improvements that isometric contractions can make in athletes. So a lot of new things that especially sport team coaches should look at when it comes to especially rehab times. Anyway, collagenous extracellular matrix, the ECM that he talks about. So, isometric contraction examples. For us, you got pulls into pins at various lengths. You see Ryan doing the pulls. Over here, you see Ruby doing a squat. Now, I like using bands, because if she starts to not produce a maximal force into the pins, then the bar is going to come down because the bands will pull it. So it ensures she continues to create maximal force into the bar, into the pins. So wall squats, it's a great way to strengthen, like the patella tendon, for example, is from what I've read, I would recommend going to read Keith Barr, but from what I've read, you would go down to the point of where you might feel a little discomfort, but before you might feel pain, and spend 3 to 4 sets of 30 second contractions, and over time try to work your way down until you're at full length, full range of motion. So at the bottom of a squat, pushing up, or say at a leg extension when it's fully lengthened. So think about a leg extension at any your Gold's Gym, World Gym, or wherever the gyms might be in Australia. And at the beginning, that's when your quad is lengthened the most. So basically all you would have to do was put the pin in the maximal amount of weight. And assuming you're not some brute, you can push as hard as you want and the stack won't move. So you're able to produce a maximal isometric contraction right there in the leg extension. Same thing with leg curls. When your leg is fully, when you first get into a lying leg curl, your hamstring is as lengthened as it gets. And so putting it up to the maximum amount of weight and then trying to create, flexion of the knee, yet it's too heavy to overcome, you can produce a maximal isometric contraction. So, or for pressing upper body, you think about pressing into pins. I use that all the time as a power lifter, and it really helped increase my bench press because you can remember an isometric contraction is specific to the angle of the joint that you're creating that contraction. So I would do it at all the points that I was the weakest in the bench press, and sometimes I would go a few inches above that and a few inches below that just to really obliterate that so-called weak zone that we all have. Potential improvements to specific athletic qualities when paired with bounding. Like I said, massive improvements in elasticity. Go check out some of the work from Jake Tura. Strengthened positions examples. You got to take that S off there, so forgive me for that one. But taking on a block, making a tackle, specific joint angles, especially for powerlifting, weightlifting, and other strength sports. So if there's a point of your lift in the squat, the bench, the deadlift, or the snatch, or the clean, if there's a part of the pull where you're the weakest, creating some strong isometric contractions in those positions will really help you overcome that. Even like in the jerk, for whether you're doing strongman or jerk for Olympic weightlifting, we've used a lot of isometric contractions in that position of the bottom of a dip to really strengthen that. So it's a great way to get better at elasticity too. So it's a safe way to rehabilitate because it only takes 6 hours recovery, and it ensures the proper myotendinous junction. So like if you have say you're super elastic and your tendon is super strong, because your tendon needs to be super strong at the where it connects to the bone, but where it connects to the muscle, if it is thicker and stronger than the actual muscle where it connects, it can cause a muscle tear. So you want to make sure that it's a good relationship. In conclusion, remember, if you aren't measuring, you're guessing. The isometric contraction is really tough, with velocity, but there's a few ways that you can. Number one, making sure that you're doing the same, 4 to 5 second or whatever the isometric contraction you're doing, making sure that you're not cheating that, so you can compare apples to apples. For Keith Barr, it's 3 to 4 sets of 30 seconds that he recommends when you're coming back in that rehab setting, and I might even recommend that ongoing to keep the tendons strong and thick and make sure that myotendinous junction is healthy. GymAware ensures consistent height and time for pauses. GymAware can measure overall athletic improvements though. Example, RSI score, which is where you saw, if you watched the episode on elasticity, you noticed we did the RSI with Ryan where he jumped from the 45 centimeter blocks, and we're looking at ground contact time as it compares to height. That's a great look at elasticity. And so isometrics in conjunction with bounding, like a depth jump, should improve your elasticity. So that's one way you could measure it with GymAware. As always, email me, travis@gymaware.com, for any questions, or if you guys have any potential topics you'd like to see me cover. I would love to get your feedback. Thank you.